Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heartcore. This is Miko, and on the other side of the world, we have Celestina.
Hey.
And today we're going to be continuing our little conversation about Lady Di, but we're also introducing Jill Dando, who's known to have been quite similar to Lady Di in several ways. So this is why we started this series in the first place, because I had watched a documentary of Jill Dando and how she's been referenced to Lady Di. And as you can see, if you're watching on the screen, there is quite a bit of similarity even in the looks. The haircut later on was implemented into Jill Dando's style. But it's just a very interesting story to compare and to see these two individuals next to one another. Also, their human design charts, of course.
That's why you're here, guys, to see us do the things with the human design charts. So, I guess a little bit about Jill Dando. She is most notably known for hosting the Crime Stoppers show in the UK, as well as also being like the face of the BBC network for most of the 90s. So she actually got her start. She was like pretty small town galley from the UK and ended up really liking theater and performance and just was a really eloquent speaker. And she started on like a local news station back in like the early 80s, and she really made a name for herself like on the local station, and then got a really amazing opportunity to work with BBC in London, moved to the big bad city, not bad, just big, moved to the big city relatively, I guess. And again, just like went from being a broadcaster on BBC to having multiple different shows and hosting multiple different shows. And by the time of like the mid 1990s, late 1990s, she was like the face of BBC. And I believe they also referred to, like, you know how people like say America's sweetheart? She was basically like not royalty, but like the UK's, the BBC's sweetheart, right? Like personality, like household name, and just very well known, very well liked by the British public. Similar to Princess Di, which is kind of also why we're talking about these two in conjunction with each other. So I did a little bit of like dive into just her presentation skills, and I may or may not have watched a 1999 episode. Actually, it was the last episode before her death that she did on like Crime Stoppers, and basically she was just like the main presenter, and then they talked about other crime stories, like literally a la minute. So like how true crime podcasts do this today, or shout out to Rising Crime from the Oh No Media podcast or podcast like host, like how they do weekly updates or bi-weekly updates on true crime happening then. Similarly, Jill hosted a TV show that did that, right? With like as much like video footage as they had for like the mid to late 90s. So she was pretty prolific in this space. And then also you could like call the true crime or like the Crime Stoppers phone number, and like if you had any info, it was basically just like what Miko and I listened to on the regular basis, but in 1990s format, where you can like call in and potentially help them solve crimes, which is pretty dope. In addition to talking about more of the challenging topics when she was hosting like the late night show on the BBC, right? Like the late night news network. So yeah, just a really nice presenter, really seemingly down to earth human. And I can understand how she touched the heart of so many people, like watching her shows, whether it was when she was presenting on news in the BBC, or she was doing like the holiday travel show, or the Crime Stoppers show. So yeah, again, I can understand how she was making waves in the different aspects of what she was reporting on. So, what else you got, Miko?
Yeah, thank you for explaining her background, because it's been a while since I watched it. So what I've remembered from all of that is also her kind nature. So she was also trying to go against or to bring light, to shed light onto certain issues in the world. And even though it was politically very challenging to do so, but she still used her position at the BBC to shed light onto certain topics. Especially this, was it Serbia?
It was a war in Kosovo.
Ah, okay. Yeah, the war in Kosovo. So this was one of the big topics that she covered close to the end of her life, and she tried to bring awareness to that so people would be supported and helped. And this was also something that led to certain theories regarding her death later down the line. But this kind and caring and supportive nature seems to have been something that was very similar to Lady Di. So this is why people have also compared them, not just because of the looks, but also because a lot of similar character traits. And she was the one that this travel series that you were talking about, before she came on the scene with being the main presenter for this show, it wasn't as successful as when she joined. And back then there were only 3 channels. So she was really super, super famous in the UK. So if we take a look at her chart, we can see that there are also quite a few similarities in both Jill Dando and Lady Diana's chart. They were born very close to one another. So Jill Dando was born in November 1661 and Lady Di was born in July 61. And that means that the slow-moving planets are in similar positions. So Pluto is also in gate 40. It's probably not in the same lines. So Lady Di has 40.1 in her conscious Pluto and Jill Dando 40.5. And this was the gate that is very much connected to wanting to be alone. So it's one of the alone gates, but it's also this channel. We talked about it. I think we talked about it in the last episode, because Lady Di has the full channel, and it is about having this contracts that if you have relationships with people, if even business, friendship, romantic, whatever it may be, you have certain contracts, you have certain ways that you would like the relationship to go. Even though it's not a written contract per se, but you do have certain things that you would like to be fulfilled in this relationship. And if it is not fulfilled, you won't feel satisfied. And this was a big challenge within Lady Di, because she entered this marriage with Prince Charles or King Charles, and she was expecting him to be a loving and caring husband, presumably. I'm not 100% sure, but I do have a feeling that she was actually in love. And she did think that this was going to be a bit of a romantic or a really love-filled marriage as well. And in the end, it didn't turn out to be the way that she had imagined. And this must have been additionally extremely difficult for her to go through all of this process, because she had these expectations, and this is very, very dominant in her chart, where you can see her Plutos are in it, her North Node, her South Node. So it is something that is very important to her. And it has a lot to do with touch as well, this channel and these 2 gates, because this is how you get to know someone. This is how you get to understand if they're correct for you or if they're not correct for you. It has a lot to do with touch. And we mentioned this already in the last episode, that Lady Di, she was not afraid of touching people. She always, when you see her take the flowers, she always tries to touch the kid on the head or says thank you in some way with a handshake or something. So this was a characteristic that they shared. Jill Dando doesn't have the full channel, but it's a generational aspect that is shared by both of them, because Pluto is a generational planet, and that is kind of the energy that you would have had back in the 60s. She also has the gates 59 and 6. So this is Jill Dando, which is a very, very fertile channel. And it's also the gate 6 is about breaking down people's walls. So people may have felt threatened by her when they are jealous of her. So it's not a threat as in she's dangerous, but it's a she is my competition kind of threat. So this is one aspect, but most of the time these people have a lot of tact as well, and they are able to connect with people in a deep way. So they are here to bring forth creative processes, like they can give birth to creativity, they can literally give birth to people. So it's a very fertile channel. And with her, this was in her Uranus, so it's her unique spark, the gate 59.1. And the gate 6 is in her Mars, so in her unconscious Mars. So 59 in her conscious Uranus and 6 in her unconscious Mars. So these are two elements. The gate 6 is still something that needs to be developed throughout time. And there are a few more comparison, like gate 44, Lady Di also has that as well in Neptune. So there are quite a few similarities, even in her head. Jill Dando has gate 4 defined, and Lady Di has the full channel 63.4. So in this case, it's in different planets. But as you can see, there are quite a few things that just are very similar in their designs. They don't have the same centers defined, though. Would you like to share something about that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is that, right, being a TV broadcaster, you'd think she'd have a defined throat. And her throat is really open, which I think is very interesting, right? So that to me, I know some podcasters who have a completely open throat, which I think is also really cool, right? My understanding, though, is that she wasn't really interviewing other people, so in theory, like, that would be like amplifying someone else's voice. But I think she uses her open throat to really press on, I think, just important things that were happening around the world during that period of time, right? So, like, we mentioned the outbreak of the war in Kosovo and how she was reporting on it, like, very strongly, and that seemed to upset potentially people who were in power in Kosovo, as well as, like, hosting the Crime Stoppers show, right? So amplifying other people's voices, amplifying other people's situations. I think that that's just really cool to be able to see that come into play. I wasn't imagining, so having done all of this research prior to really studying her chart, I wasn't imagining her energy being so open, but having an undefined head, an undefined ajna, completely open throat, an undefined spleen, an undefined heart, an undefined root, and really having all of her energy kind of in that emotional, sacral G-center space. I feel like, at least with the G-center piece of it, right, having mostly individual channels, or having the 214 come from her sacral to her identity center, I feel like is a really strong individual identity channel. Obviously, you can speak more to this than I can, Miko, but when I see this in someone's chart, I'm like, okay, damn, you know who you are, and you have the energy to put forth that into the world as well. But it seemed as though, so kind of going back into her story, right? So the way she came up in the BBC, it just happened to be that she dated a dude who was an editor in the BBC, right? So by no means am I putting the kibosh or like trying to downplay her talent in this world, right? But I think, unfortunately, it was like the late 80s, early 90s, and it was kind of seen as normal, I think, to have relationships and get places by doing things like that. I don't know, man. Maybe they loved each other. I don't know. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I feel like she did her best to stay true to who she was, going from small town broadcaster to BBC, right? She didn't change her looks, but the guy who she ended up dating, I don't recall his name, who was a BBC editor, was like, you need to change your hair, you need to change your style, you look too small town. And I feel like that's the one time, I don't know what their relationship was other than they dated and like how he influenced her. But I find that that's really interesting because that's when she changed her hair. After he said that, that's when she changed her hair to look like Lady Di's. That's when she changed her, like, her dress. And mind you, she had like short cropped, like brown hair. And then she went almost full blonde like Lady Di, right? Like that's pretty drastic. And she even got Lady Di's hairstylist to like do it for her. Like it wasn't just like make me look like Lady Di, it was like the same hairstylist to do it. So I just find that that's really interesting because she's so defined in her G center to have made those decisions. I wonder, one, what she was feeling during that period of time and what those external forces were for her to feel the need to make those changes externally. And did that really help the way she delivered? Probably not, right? Like delivered the news? Probably not. But did that affect the way other people received what she was saying? Probably, because she looked like Lady Di and people loved that. So I find that that's very interesting. And then two, again, I don't remember her boyfriend slash editor of BBC at that point, but I wonder what his design is and how that affected her because she is so open in her chart. So those are just two notes that I have off the bat that looking at her chart don't really seem to align with that, right? And I think that that's also a good point. Like just because you are X, Y, and Z in your chart doesn't mean that outside forces or outside energies can't have an effect on you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said and found in her chart and compared to her life. And the point that you're making that just because you have a certain chart, we always look at the chart and we can make conclusions out of it. And depending on the human design reader that you're using, they can either take it into a positive direction or into a negative direction. So you can look at the shadows of a person, but you can also look at the light aspects of the person or the potential that resides in the person, because the chart actually shows the potential, or I choose to read it as if I can see the potential in someone. But the external influence, and this is why we always talk about conditioning and how drastic and impactful conditioning can be, because you may believe that you're someone or a certain way of being. But if you would actually look at your human design and use the potential that is inside of you, it would be very different if you were heavily conditioned. And the reason why we're trying to guide people to live their design is because it creates far less resistance in your life. It doesn't mean that all problems will go away, but you will have a much easier time handling them and you will face less resistance. It's not going to be so much of a struggle to go through life. It will be more of a flow. So when we're looking at charts like this of people that we haven't met personally, that we haven't had as clients, or that we don't know in friendship or romantic ways or business ways, we can only assume which direction they chose. And by looking at their lives, we can also kind of piece things together. But it still doesn't tell us, because we only see and we mentioned this also with Lady Di, we only see what we are given to see by the media, by themselves as well, what they choose to share with us. So all of these things influence how we perceive someone. Also, sometimes I look at newspaper articles and you see a very horrible picture with a headline. And from the same shoot or from the same event that this person attended, you will have a different newsletter that will take a different picture, same outfit, same everything, but just the facial expression changes and with a different headline, and it makes such a big difference. So this is what I mean by media also influencing us. So in human design, in her case, what I see is that she has the right angle cross of the Sphinx. And this is a cross where people share their secrets, their stories with you. She has gate 13 here, as you can see. In her Earth, 13.6. She's a 4-6 line. But this cross of the Sphinx is really very impactful when it comes to also providing a direction to people. So people will share their thoughts, their ideas, their feelings with you. It's unconscious in her design, so she might not have been so aware of it, but at her age, she probably has felt this, that this happens quite a lot in her life. And then they can lead people into the right direction. So they can provide insights. It's not really a cross that gives you insights of what you should do with your life, but it is unbelievably helpful for everyone around them. We have someone that we both know that has this cross, and she is so fantastic at doing exactly this. And I really, really hope that she's going to take this gift and make a career out of it, because when you use these gifts in your work life, it's literally that you won't work a day in your life because you just love what you do. So yeah, this is what I see. And the 4-6 is again pointing towards her being social, but in her social surroundings. So it's not like a 5th line who will meet people randomly everywhere they go, and then they create this network from strangers, but it's really a network that is from friends, from family, from people that are close to you. And the 6th line is, sadly, she didn't get to really express her full potential, because with the 6th line, wherever you do have a 6th line, this is something that is going to take time to develop. And people that have a 6th line, you may not want to hear that, but a lot of times the full development is going to take place after 50. So this is after your Chiron return, which is why it's so important for 6th lines to understand their Chiron return and to understand when it's taking place. But this is with every 6th line in your chart. Look at the gate and you will see that this is something that will take time, no matter if it's in Mars or not in Mars or anywhere else. It will just take time to develop, and it can blossom past the age of 50, sometimes it's 48, 49, something like this. So whenever your Chiron return is happening, and then when it's happening, so if it's at 48, you will still need at least 1.5 years to go through the full transformation. It's not just on the day that your Chiron return is happening, that's it, that's done. But it takes time to develop. And yeah, be patient with yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't use your skills already, but the full bloom will come after 50.
You got another 14, 15 years, and I got another almost 20. Great. Let's go.
Yeah. It's already starting to come slowly, but I do genuinely feel like the best version of me is still coming.
That's kind of cool though, right? Something to look forward to.
Absolutely. And this also kind of goes back to what people say, oh, the other day I met a woman, she was walking her dog, and Ananda wanted to play with her. My dog wanted to play with her. And then this dog was starting to get all happy and wagged its tail and started to also even jump onto Ananda and on his face to just try to get closer because she was very small. And the owner said she's too old. And I was like, just thinking, too old for what? Because a dog is never too old to just sniff and see, hey, who are you? What are you doing? How are you doing? So this is one thing. I'm pretty sure she meant she's too old to play, of course. But I just think that this idea of age being the limit of saying, okay, you are too old or you are too young. Okay, the too young part can be the case in certain aspects, of course. Like sexual things, for example. You can be too young for that. But I mean, just to say you're too old to do something, I have a problem with that. I don't want to believe that. It's more about your physical strength, your mental, emotional energy, your spiritual aspects. So all of that combined, that's what we should go by and not by age. We're going by age way too much.
I like that insight. I feel like, I mean, it does transcend more than just like dog years, you know? You're as old as you feel, you're as old as, like you said, you energetically are, your physical body and your muscular system can handle. And there's a lot that goes into that, obviously. But yeah, age is just a number. And it can be a mindset if you let it be a mindset.
Absolutely. So yeah, we kind of went off the topic. But that was my little 2 cents on Jill Dando and her cross. And she's also a single definition, which is, again, yet another point of her theoretically knowing who she is, because as a single definition, you don't really need other people in your life to find wholeness. This is what is said. Even as a split definition, you don't need it, but you're fooled to believe that you need it. So within yourself, when you are a split definition, you often long for another part. You often long for, if you are a single split and not a single wide split. So if you understand what that means, the difference, we should maybe do an episode on splits. But if you are a single narrow split and you only have one gate missing that is bridging your split, this is often where you will try to prove yourself. This is often where you feel you're not good enough. This is often where what you feel is missing. And this is why you will try to find people who will bridge that split. So it doesn't mean that this is the way that it should be, this is how it should go, because you are complete the way that you are. You're not missing anything, but we're fooled to believe that inside of us. And Jill Dando, she, even if we take the designs apart, the conscious and the unconscious, she would still be a single definition, but she would be a generator, a pure generator. So she may not have had the conscious awareness of her emotional solar plexus. And it may have been something that she developed over time to understand that that is there in her design. The emotions are there.
Should we get into her final days? I don't know about her final days, but her final hours are some wild tales. Or I guess the time after her final hour was some wild tales. So, the way we got all up into this is because Miko and I are both true crime fanatics, and she happened to find this YouTube video, this like hour-long docu-series on Jill Dando, and sent it to me. She's like, yo, we gotta do this, and this is really the impetus for these last 2 episodes, comparing Lady Di and Jill Dando, just because of how much the UK loved both of them, how much they looked similarly, and their very early deaths. So Jill Dando was gunned down in front of her home on the outskirts of London. And weird things, because she was living with her fiance at that time in a completely different house. She ran a couple of errands that morning. She got a fax from her manager, so she had to go back home, and that's where her fax machine was. And didn't even make it in the house. And literally had someone come up behind her and shoot her on her porch, and the gun was literally touching her head when she was shot. Like the damage from it, just to not gonna show you images, but like the damage from it was so bad that it looked like multiple like stab wounds to the head. I can't even imagine what those last moments felt like for her. That must have been horrifying, and for her sake, I hope it was really quick because that's horrible. Nonetheless, one of her neighbors found her, basically just in a pool of blood outside of her home. And then it became, I mean, obviously it was a very active crime scene. Unfortunately, though, it was the late 90s, and I guess cordoning off the crime scene wasn't as important as getting photos, right? So again, journalists, photographers kind of flooded her front yard, and I mean, at that point, it was a pretty active crime scene, and I don't know. I feel like there just wasn't enough evidence taken, like there, or perhaps evidence was messed with because people were walking on the lawn. I don't know. Again, I just feel like it wasn't cordoned off as it should have been, as a lot of cases, if you're in the true crime world, are not done to the nines as they should be, right? Like the people aren't given whatever. Totally different topic. Nonetheless, there were several suspects, one of them being a man who lived about a mile-ish, 2-ish kilometers away from her house, might have even been closer. But one of her neighbors saw a suspicious looking man in a black trench coat, like walking away from the crime scene. So the police ended up talking to this guy, and he also happened to be like staring at Lady Di, like back in the early 90s, wearing a very similar trench coat, and was arrested because he was, I assume, on like the palace lawn. God knows how he got there, but like was on like the palace lawn trying to like stare at Lady Di. One, why? If you admire someone, why are you trying to do that? You know, just do it from afar. Don't be creepy. Anyway, he was the suspect in this case too, which, you know, kind of random, but also not. They look very similar. They're both beloved by the UK peoples. And unfortunately, he actually ended up going to trial. I feel like they futzed with the evidence a bit, in the sense of like they redrew the like caricature, like witness caricature, to like meet his description, and then they used that redraw in court. So I just don't love that, right? Like the police heading this kind of put him in a corner. He ended up spending 8 years in jail, and then finally was like retried and found not guilty. But could you imagine like going to jail for 8 years and for a crime that you didn't commit because it was like circumstantial evidence? Some fucked up shit. Anyway, there was another theory, because it was so well done, right? Like, this dude was just some schmo down the road. Maybe he had a gun, maybe he didn't. Oh, I think they also, like, found, like, gun residue. Like, the teensy tiniest amount of gun residue in the pocket of his trench coat that he was wearing. So that was also some evidence that they, like, brought to trial. But it was, like, very
Plus
small.
Gun
What?
residue. I mean, gun residue is something that you can't even pin down to one gun or one event.
They used it heavily in trial. Yeah. Like those two very small, seemingly circumstantial pieces of evidence. Anyway, the other theories, though, are kind of great. So, we've mentioned several times throughout this episode that obviously she was reporting on some big, heavy topics throughout the world, right? She probably pissed off some people because the BBC was an international, probably not that time, maybe, at least heavily influential in the UK, if not an international source of TV and information for people. And she was reporting on the war in Kosovo. And I believe she was also reporting on a person who ended up murdering two of the presidents or two of the people in power in Kosovo at the time. And it is theorized that he either did it personally or like had a Serbian hitman like come kill her. I mean, real talk. It was a one and done kind of shot, right? So maybe this was an assassination. Maybe this was done by a professional. Who knows? However, in that same like case file to kind of semi-wrap this up that you sent me, Miko, they also said that there was an update, I think last year, and then most recently a couple of weeks ago, back in April of this year, 2024, where that, like, the person who fit the description and like the caricature that they did the first time, not the one that they forged to like make the other guy go to jail, but the one that they did the first time, met this dude's description to like the T, and it ended up being like a Serbian hitman, like the Serbian hitman. So neither confirmed nor denied, but I think it's plausible.
What I found fascinating as well was that the bullet itself, it had some holes in it. And apparently this was something that they often did. The Serbian hitmen often did. This was something that I also found who puts holes into a bullet? But yeah, don't know the reason. I'm not a gun expert, not a bullet expert either. So yeah, but to me, this is something that would be one of my biggest nightmares. Just being at the wrong time, wrong place, and then being caught for something that you didn't do. And yesterday, I need to send you this one as well. I actually watched a case where a girl was murdered, and there were two people that were investigated, and it seemed so likely that it was them, but in the end it wasn't. And it was like there was evidence. I'm pretty sure you just did like mimic dun dun dun
dun dun dun. That's exactly what I did.
Okay, so one of the things was that the tire tracks, it was a mismatched tire. So there was 3 tires that were the same and 1 tire that was different. And then there was also blue paint on one of the branches, and this was directly next to the corpse. So this person, I hope I'm not spoiling it for you, but this person, they assumed that this was the person that killed her because he parked right next to the corpse, and it was raining heavily, so the tire tracks mixed with blood, and this is how they narrowed it down to this person. They also assumed it was another person who also had mismatched tires and a blue truck. But this person was the first person, the one that parked right next to the corpse, was later on, he swore that he had nothing to do with it. He didn't see the corpse. And it turned out that it was correct. He really didn't have anything to do with it. And the other person with the mismatched tires and the blue paint, he was asked during the interrogation, so would there be any reason, because there was blood in his trunk apparently, and would there be any reason why there would be blood on your clothes of that night? And he said no at the beginning, but then he said, no, actually, maybe there could be a reason, because I ran over a porcupine and it was bleeding all over me. And you can't write this in books. I mean, I was so tempted after listening to that. I was like, oh my God, this needs to be made into a movie. And I was already going through, how can you make this into a really twisted, like psychological twisted movie? Who would you show first? How would you go about it? Because I just found it so crazy that 2 people were in situations where they could have really done it, but then it really actually turned out that it wasn't them, and another person was arrested for that. But that's even the guy with the porcupine, he didn't do it. And I was like, really? Seriously? How? But so lucky. I mean, imagine, because it could have gone through in a lot of cases. Okay, you can test the porcupine blood, that it's not that it's animal blood, not human. But sometimes people or the police or or the courts, they use these small things, like, for example, gunpowder, and they put you into prison for something that you didn't do. And other times you're just super lucky that you can get out of it.
All wrapped up neatly in a bow to Jill Dando. Damn. So I guess technically she, like, the killer is still, or her murderer is still unsolved, technically. But yeah, I'm happy Homeboy's out of prison because he didn't do it, even though he was a little bit creepy. He can be creepy in his own home, at least. And yeah, I'm happy you brought this up. We didn't know how long these cases would, or these two would go, but I think we wrapped it up nicely in 2 episodes. What do you guys think?
Yes, leave a comment, message us on Instagram if you have anything to share with us, some feedback or just some cases or some ideas that you would like us to talk about during the podcasts. Thank you everyone for listening. It was a pleasure being here again.
Ciao guys, until next week.
Bye.